Now is the moment. Your leadership is needed now more than ever before. These, of course, are just some of the insights and the sound bites coming through as we were listening in to more of our partners and stakeholders. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we've done so far is we've created a moment to take stock of where we are. It's been an authentic reflection. We're now getting ready for our very first panel discussion as we really now delve into the reality of converging crises. We're talking about the crisis of climate change, of a global pandemic, of economic uncertainty, of rising inequality, of political instability, and even the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing as a result of the war on the Ukraine. And we're asking the broad question, what is the role of business and what is the role of business leaders in this moment right now? To moderate this first panel discussion, it's my pleasure to hand back to Madame Sanda Ojiambo, who is going to take over as she introduces our panelists and takes us through the conversation.
Welcome, John and Solange, and thank you so much for joining me today to discuss business leadership in troubled times. We've just rolled into the Leaders Summit and heard so much from dignitaries and leaders from all around the UN system about the current state of the world. And so we've heard that the past few years have seen these converging crises, from climate change to COVID-19, economic uncertainty, increasing inequality, political instability, unprecedented disruption and global transformation. Gosh, the list really could go on. And of course, we have the war in Ukraine that is unfolding with devastating consequences. Humanitarian needs are multiplying and spreading, and there's this mounting global crisis, including detrimental consequences on food security for many countries. As we know, the Secretary-General recently announced the Global Crisis Response Group in the UN. And this committee will mobilize support and engagement along 3 tracks: energy, food systems, and financing. But beyond this humanitarian and development challenge ahead of us, the crisis is also highlighting the fact that businesses cannot act independently of the political context in which they operate. Businesses have a crucial role to play in reimagining the social contract, reinforcing public trust to their operations, and partnering with the UN, governments, and civil society towards peace, justice, and strong institutions. So today, dear friends, we're going to discuss business leadership in addressing these complex and interconnected challenges. So I'd like to introduce 2 speakers, both of whom are dear friends and also board members of the UN Global Compact, John Denton and Solange Ribeiro. John Denton is the Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Commerce. He was recently appointed by the UN Secretary-General to represent the private sector on the steering committee of the UN Global Crisis Response Group that I just mentioned. And Solange is the Vice Chair of the UN Global Compact Board, as well as the Deputy CEO of Neo Energia, a leader in the Brazilian electricity sector. So welcome, both of you, and it's really great to have you join us today. So as we've heard, these converging crises have raised expectations for business leaders to speak up and act on a broad range of issues. So my first question to both of you, I'd like you to share some brief thoughts on what has shifted for you and your business ecosystem over the past few years. What are some of the dilemmas that business leaders are facing? Solange, would you like to go first, and then I'll hand over to John? And I know there could be multiple, but you could flag your 2 or 3 key challenges. Thank you. Over to you, Solange.
Thank you, Sandra. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and John. Good morning, everyone. Everything that you said is so important, like these multiple crises over the recent years that we've been through, and not to say the climate change, the COVID, and the breakout of Ukraine have tested the mettle of a business leader ability to respond to adversity. Despite all the efforts that we've been doing on climate action, we are nowhere near to achieve 1.5 degree. We facing so much challenge for that. COVID has heavily affected the whole world in this past 2 years, forcing the companies to reinvent themselves, to adapt or fail. under the duress that came with the COVID. And regarding the war of Ukraine, we've been reading so much and talking so much that at first it's so important to say that we must endeavor and reject any kind of violent conflict that we have as this one is unbelievable. The war in Ukraine, not only everything that we've been talking about humanitarian effort, it has shown us, and when we talk about business, how, for instance, a monopoly of a resource such as the Russian gas market in Europe can be used as a threat. And not to mention all the other problems that we have, as you mentioned already, like poverty, insecurity, and many other conflicts. No doubt, very difficult times. And due to that, it's so imperative that companies remember that they do have a crucial role to play, and responsible business have to act to make a change to that. And when I always talk about that, I think there is nothing can happen without really true, urgent, transformative, and collective action. I think that's the main word, like government, private sector, and civil society all together. Nowadays, when we talk about companies and we talk with investors, companies are expected to generate shared value for all the stakeholders. It goes far beyond shareholders like used to be in the past. This is already a reality. Companies are expected to have a non-financial performance just as good and positive as its financial one. Uh, as such, business leaders must take many decisions due troubled times, and regarding those issues, like we should take we should act together. I believe to set ambitious goals. We regard the SDNG. We've been talking so much about that, goals that can be measured, goals that can be achieved, and plans that can take us to that. With the whole war in Ukraine, we've been thinking a lot about supply chain. Yeah? How can we deal with supply chain challenge that we have? Um, Gender is also an issue that it has been like on the top of our mind. Not before talking about human rights and the whole social being of the society, I would say. As you mentioned, sometimes the secretary is being addressed the food insecurity, energy transition, acceleration, and has financial sustainability is like the top of our priority. And nothing better than the 10 principles, I would say, in the Global Compact to drive us through this route. And this has been, I say, no more, never been so relevant like it has these days, like to bring back this ethical sense of responsibility that we have. I would say, like, just to conclude, that the relevance of the private sector has been really accentuated on those troubled times, and the companies must assume their responsibility to society and to the world that we seek to build and maintain a better world. I always say it's no longer our option; it's an obligation. This would be my first comment, Sanders. Thank you.
No, absolutely, Solange. And that is quite a long list of challenges here. So, John, I'm curious, Solange has talked about the energy crisis, the need for transformative leadership, value creation, the supply chain. From where you sit in the ICC and that immense footprint that you have, I mean, what does this look like for the type of business stakeholder that you deal with? And what does this look like also from your vantage point, being engaged in the Secretary General's crisis response group?
Look, first of all, thanks very much, Sandra, and a shout out to you for your leadership of the Global Compact. It's been remarkable, I think, to see the level of engagement that you've been able to engender on a global basis. And all kudos to you and the team, and congratulations. I will also just make comment that it is quite remarkable that the Secretary General has included the ICC, not because we're odd, it's simply because it's the first time the UN has actually included the private sector structurally in a global response to a crisis. And I think that is a very important point to make for those of you who are listening and watching this show. What's being recognized here is really that one of the biggest global problems that we're confronting, and of course Ukraine, Russia is regional with global implications, it's recognized can only be solved with the active participation of the private sector. And of course, we're honored as the ICC is seen as the most credible and I suppose the most obvious player to support this because of the diversity of what we represent. More than 2/3 of the ICCs in emerging markets, by the way. I look at this in three different dimensions, the way we're looking at it now. First is that increasingly business is thrust into the front line of geopolitical disputes. The second, and you mentioned trust, and it's very interesting for me, this issue of trust, the Edelman indicator. Dig into the data a little bit. There's a bit of a difference between the way rich people hold trust in business and the way poor people hold trust in business. And then there's an issue that's actually emerging quite strongly and quite quickly about consumer choice based on nationalism over multinationalism, which is quite an interesting challenge. And I'll just quickly deal with the three of them. So if you look at that issue about business in the forefront of geopolitics, and obviously you can feel that, but there's this kind of gray zone stuff that's going on here, like cyber attacks, IP attacks. I mean, look at the classic where a political decision is made on security reasons to exclude a company and a company or a nation, and it has immediate consequences for companies. The classic example I could use is Sweden and Huawei, and the immediate impact of that on Ericsson's business. And I'm not saying the decisions are wrong, but what I'm actually saying, what's being pointed to here is that governments need to rethink, particularly with business being pushed into this role, the way in which they engage with business, particularly on geopolitical and geostrategic issues. If you're going to be dealing with cyber risk, don't just tell us, inform us, engage with us to actually talk about these sorts of issues. Mm-hmm. Stop seeing national security as distinct from economic security, and stop seeing diplomacy as a state-only play. It clearly involves now business. So commercial diplomacy, economic diplomacy is there. So you need to rethink the way in which government is engaging with business here. And obviously, we have a lot to say on this. We're involved in this sort of stuff. But I do think this challenge for business being involved in that role requires stakeholders to think differently about how we actually engage with each other. And that's something that I think is out there. The second issue is around this point of trust. I just briefly mentioned it before. On one level, I kind of sit back and say, isn't this great that business is the most trusted entity in the world, more trusted than international institutions, governments, etc. But when you dig into that data,
scrape the score. It's low. It's 60% or something.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of dancing on this stuff. But let's have a look at it closely. And the point I made before is that, frankly, rich people are more trusting of business than poor people. And maybe I'm putting that too baldly, but I think it's something we've got to understand. There is an emerging deficit of trust between those who receive and those who are actually winners here. And so there's a really big issue for it. And that plays out nationally. I heard one of the speakers before talk about the transition. There is, and we know this from our huge community in the developing country of businesses, there is a deficit of trust emerging between promises given by developed or the developed world and advanced economies and what's being received on climate financing and all sorts of areas here. So that is something that we've really got to watch. And of course, one of the consequences is that one of the public goods that people just seem to expect, which is community support for open markets and functioning private sectors, you got to earn that. And if there's an absence of engagement or disengagement, then you will see that flip, and you're seeing that flip quite quickly. So this is an issue that we're seeing, a second issue we're seeing play through quite quickly at the moment. So nurturing and earning the right to maintain that public good of open markets, rule of law, functioning market economies, all these things are so important for business. Don't take it for granted. You've got to work on it, which is why we've got a campaign globally on stopping the global rise in inequality, why the SDGs are so important, going back to that point. But actually, as we go towards it, we also have to think about the plus 2030 agenda, which is what we're working on at the moment. The third thing I mentioned briefly before is something else we're seeing is that out of all this is the world being looked at through local lens rather than global lens. That's what you look out through first. And the global side, or the multinational side, is sort of a dimmer part of the way in which the world thinks these days. And that's being reflected in consumer behaviors. Consumers are preferring national brands over multinational brands. And that's actually becoming pretty clear in the data as well. So that actually does, I think, lead people to think about ESG. So when people are arguing, and obviously we're all hearing the case for friendshoring, nearshoring, etc., that's okay. I understand the security logic for that. But don't forget that part of that means if you're going to reallocate your supply chains, where is it going from? Developing markets, emerging economies. What about the level of trust you need there? What about the consequences of that from an ESG point of view? And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well.
Mm-hmm.
We need to think about those sorts of issues and weigh them up before we rush full-bloodedly into the attractiveness of the friendshoring slogan. There's a lot more nuance that needs to be considered. And this issue, as I said before, about effective discussions between governments, security agencies, business, economic players as well, needs to be considered here. And that's why, for example, we engage with NATO these days, why we engage with security agencies, because it's actually important for them to actually not see the private sector as a subordinate tool, but actually as a critical player in the security of a nation, and what the different elements are required to keep all that together.
Yeah. The multiple layers that are required of business leadership. Just yesterday at dinner with my team and some friends, actually, we talked about, gosh, the skills and the breadth of knowledge and networks that a business leader really needs to bring to play these days is significantly different. Your leadership role at Neo Energia, specifically working in the energy sector, I mean, what are some of the impacts that you're seeing on your business, based on the ongoing war in Ukraine, and how is this impacting Neo Energia's sustainability efforts, and what leadership changes have you had to make in this time?
As you said, and the first thing to think about this whole discussion on the oil, the gas from Russia, it brings us that the current crisis demonstrated that energy system that's based in full fossils is not sustainable. And not only, maybe John said something about other products, but not only for climate and environmental reasons, but mainly for energy security. Yeah, it's one thing that we have to think about, and how we can get out of that. In Brazil, we have a different reality. We do not have a dependence like Europe has on the gas from Russia. But I see in general, like this is an opportunity for renewables. I would say that I understand that we need to look in a different way, maybe than the more expensive at some degree, but in a long term, a solution that I'm sure that renewables and energy efficiency must be like a main route to get out of that. And for that, we need to emphasize that we need a lot of alliance, we need a lot of international coordination. We probably have to think about innovation, like let's talk about green energy, let's talk green hydrogen, let's talk about other ways to go through that. And the supply chain has been a challenge for everybody. I think this is a major challenge. When you look in a map where the containers are, like how we can continue to make the investments and make sure that everything is on track. They're really the also, if we look a little bit in finance, we are moving towards a global debt. distress as well. I think that's an issue that we have to keep is the global inflation, and the increase in interest rate is also something that we have to think about. But regarding, let's say, to change the dependence from an area like Europe, from a gas from one country, for instance, that it's a big thing to think about, and we need to do what would be the way that we can make this shift. We need new regulations. We need how we can make renewable like a global public good, like and how we can, maybe we should eliminate fossil fuels subsidies, for instance, how we can improve the administrative procedures and the regulation, make sure that we catch up with that in a short term. Of course, in the short term, we must see something different, but we should go ahead and look in the long term. I think for the energy sector, we can transform that as an opportunity to say bring the energy transition like 10 years in front, I'd say, to accelerate that.
Thank you, Solange. I know that there's so much opportunity for innovation and transformation within this whole energy transition, and also linking it up to its impact on the climate. John, let me turn to you. You earlier spoke about business having to navigate this war through the ESG lens. Of course, there's also the added layer of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I know we have just about 5 minutes left, and I did want to close also by asking each of you for your call to action. But John, to you, I mean, when a business has to lead through an ESG lens, what does that mean? And then what does responsible business conduct look like through that ESG lens?
A great question, Sandra. In fact, what it does reveal in many respects is how inchoate or how emerging the whole ESG debate is. Because if you think about it, the way business, particularly businesses who are conducting business in Russia, has been confronted with the situation is that overwhelmingly, I think you see 95% of people surveyed will say you must withdraw. 45% or 50% of people say they're prepared to boycott products, etc., which is all fine. And I understand the level of emotion. And as you know, the ICC, we're everywhere. So we sort of see all this sort of stuff on a continual basis. Right. But as I say, on a continual basis now, the businesses are actually in the kind of forefront here. And there's not a lot of deep thinking about what those responsible principles are. Because for every decision to leave, there are employees left behind. For every decision to leave, there are employees potentially at risk for political ramifications. For every decision to leave, there may well be products which are required for sanitary, health, and medical needs, which are actually no longer provided to communities. There is a fully rounded view of ESG that is not being displayed here. A lack of nuance is another way of putting it. And at the moment, it's very black and white. But I do think, this is something we're working on, by the way, and hopefully there's something we can share with you through the Global Compact, is what are the principles for engagement and disengagement of business in these situations? And the reason I'm saying this, going back to my first response to your first set of questions, is because businesses, this is not going to go away. There's going to be more like this. And actually that just puts me to my call for action. And if I could be quick on this, the other thing that's been revealed is the pressure on humanitarian agencies. Now, we are working strategically as the partner for UNHCR, World Food Programme, increasingly with ICRC, UNICEF. I can go on, because they now realise that they actually need a different way of working with the private sector. What's happening, I think, is we're layering on agencies like ICRC and others multiple crises upon multiple crises. They're still doing with Sudan. They're still doing with Afghanistan. And yet the funding models are actually pretty well stuck. And what we need to think through is what we're calling, and we're working on, durable humanitarianism, where business is much more engaged. And I can tell you, from having done joint appeals now with the ICC, with the World Food Programme, UNHCR for Afghanistan, Yemen, the business community is very willing to be up for this. But there's an issue against just giving money, or is there a way which we discovered during the COVID period, where businesses also may need to be ready to actually reallocate or reorientate the way they operate to support this kind of durable humanitarianism. Now, that's a big, long position, but it is a call to action to rethink humanitarianism and to rethink humanitarianism now with business at its core, not as simply a piggy bank. Because I think it will only work if we think about it differently. So that's my call to action, Sandra, and I hope I kept us within time.
You did. No, thank you, John. And it really speaks to what the Global Compact is about, which is how you can orient your business processes, your procedures, your operations and strategies towards, delivering on the SDGs and some of these ESG metrics. So I fully agree with you there. And, certainly businesses, as I said in some of my opening comments, right, at the front line of what societal needs and societal transformation is. Solange, I'll end with you. I mean, what is your call to action for businesses, governments and multilaterals for coordinated solutions? We know we need to partner perhaps better and different. What would be your call to action from where you sit?
I think the other day we were talking about that. I think we should take advantage, for instance, the Global Compact is a very good example. We have a platform there, we can coordinate, because what we need, as John was mentioned many times here, it's to work together. It's smooth stakeholders, multilateral action. That's how, in order to reach a solution. I think our participation is really necessary, and the responsibility is there. Companies are taking the responsibilities, and the Global Compact, I would say, is a platform for business to help. It's one very good start, Sandra, and no doubt that we should play a major, crucial role in mobilize the various resources that we have, because we need these things. We need the value chains to work. We need to move the way to another. We need to concern with our people as well, where we cannot just go shut down a factory in one country specifically, and then we'll have all the problems. But I'd say the geopolitics is going to change a lot how business can do. As every crisis, I would expose a lot of our weakness. I would say, I think we've been reflecting a lot about that. But we should also take it as an opportunity to assess and reflect upon them, and make sure that we find ways to team up. I think that's the main way to go.
Thank you, Solange, and thanks to both of you. Solange, your comment just brought to mind, I think, one of the lessons I took away actually from recent convenings and most recently in Davos. I mean, there's no question that we're not lacking the resources, we're not lacking the innovation, we're not lacking the technologies. I think it's how we configure the delivery of these solutions, how we partner, how we look to build trust, how we reconfigure what business can do to deliver across these many, challenges and many partnership configurations. John spoke to it. In the COVID pandemic, we suddenly saw business act very agile, very fast, and build partnerships to address the pandemic in ways we'd never seen before. So, we've come away, but there's certainly a long way to go. And I want to just appreciate you for the role that you play as leaders in your respective institutions and ecosystems. I look forward to seeing you in our next board meeting when we do meet. So thank you for this insightful discussion. And from the Global Compact end, we'll continue to host these dialogues through our Global Compact events, but also through our regional teams and our local networks. Deep thanks to you, John and Solange, and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you, John.